Yeah, that's an iconic scene from a very cult classic type movie, The Matrix. Now, older people, like my sister and her boomer friends, may not know what's going on here, but we millennials, yeah, yeah, I'm a millennial, upper end, but yeah, millennial, yeah. We know exactly what that is. In that movie, it's cult classic. I watched it years ago. I doubt that I'd rewatch the thing. But Keanu Reeves' character learns that there's more to reality than we're seeing. He gets a glimpse behind the scenes, and so he is offered a chance. He gets a choice. He can take the blue pill and he'll forget what he's seen and he'll go back living a deluded life with no knowledge of what's really going on around him. Or he can take the red pill and he'll become awake to it and see it and have to deal with it. So over the years, that's been called red pilling someone. When they wake up to something they've been sleeping about. Oh, so that's what's going on. They just taken the red pill. So that's what I'm going to ask you to make a choice about today. Let me just tell Generation Z, Gen Z, no, they don't come in gummies. No gummies. You have to take a pill, red or blue, okay? Because we're going to be dealing with something that revolves around the Olivet Discourse. Again, I'm going to have to take the video that I wanted to do last flight out and push it down the road one more time. And I also promised somebody in the comment section I would address their question about the times of the Gentiles. I'll get to that in the body of this video. But because there were several comments, one from War Drummer 72, I think, and several others about the Olivet Discourse, they're trying to see it as I'm presenting it, but there's a sticking point and they want to, some answers and clarification. That's totally reasonable, and I want to respond to that immediately. Now, before I do jump right into it, I have to mention, because you can probably tell, I've been sick for a week and a half with some sort of cold and sore throat and coughing, and my last week and a half consisted of NyQuil nights and coughing and sneezing during the day. Oh, by the way, NyQuil. Would you be interested in sponsoring a Prophecy Nut Jobs YouTube channel? Are you one or more of the following? Oh, no, 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 no. Okay, well, thanks for considering it. Thanks for considering it. So it's been longer than I wanted between videos, but that's just the way it is. I need to get a haircut, but I'm still coughing. So I might be infectious, and I can't do that. Plus, my barber, Janet, she watches the videos. As soon as I walk through the door, she'll go, "You're sick, get out of here." So all I do is cough and grow hair right now, but I want to get this video done because it's important. Because it involves the Olivet Discourse and some questions that have arisen in the comment section. Reasonable questions. Some people who are saying, look, I'm trying to get what you're saying, Stan. I'm trying to understand what you're presenting here, but I'm stuck on some problems, and I need them answered, and I want to do that. Let me begin by saying this. I don't care which position you take on the Olivet Discourse, you're going to be faced with a dilemma or a challenge. It's just which one can you tolerate? Because one of them, you're going to have to face a steep, high-level dilemma. With what I'm presenting, there is a bit of a challenge because it's different than what you've been told, and you got to get over that hump. But both have an obstacle that you've got to get over. The one the church has to get over, far too high for me to climb. Far too high for me to climb. The church, when it comes to eschatology, is a lot like my sister. My sister is very accomplished, very talented in many areas. But if she did a class on how to use an iPhone, it would be the most horrific classroom experience of your life. Anyone who attended that might need therapy later as she tried to figure out how to use an iPhone. That's the church. They're very useful on many things, except when it comes to eschatology, and they are worthless. And I hope that you'll pick the red pill and become awake to that point. Let's begin. I want to set up the dilemmas on both sides so that you can see them and make your choice. We're going to do it this way. Here's the back end prophetic events of the Olivet Discourse. Now, the Lord has more to say in the Olivet Discourse, but he's done with prophetic events at this point. He talks about watching and he gives some parables and all of that, but he's done outlining prophetic events asked by the disciples. They asked about when the temple is going to be destroyed and to talk about his coming. When he reaches this one, sending his angels out to gather the elect, he's done. Okay, there is no more. Now, the back end, the last few events begin with the signs. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on earth distress of nations with perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, and men fainting as they see what is coming upon the earth. And then we see stars falling to the earth as the powers of the heavens will be shaken. We know, and I just recently discovered this, that is war in heaven. I'm not the first one. I guarantee you I'm not the first one. I probably am not even in the top 5 million or 5 billion who discovered that, but it was new to me because the church doesn't teach it. But let's make sure you understand that's war in heaven. Stars falling to the earth. We also see that at the sixth seal. The sun going dark, and the moon not giving us light, and the stars falling to the earth. And we're told it's like a fig tree casting its winter figs, which I discovered toward the end of last year, or maybe the start of this year. That's the worthless crop. The winter fig tree crop is inedible. It doesn't ripen. It just falls to the ground and it's worthless. So what's coming to heaven is worthless. We also see stars being cast to earth. Over at Revelation 12, we see that Satan draws a third of the stars to him, and they get cast to earth. And then we see war in heaven. Oh, and Satan and his angels get cast to earth too. So why won't the church admit this is war in heaven? Because they want the whole thing in the last 7 years. Wrong direction from your point of view. In the last 7 years. They want that whole thing. War in heaven won't let them move it. Because war in heaven then goes on to tell us that after Satan gets cast to the earth, he goes forth and does a whole line of final events. He brings forth the beast, there comes the false prophet, the 666, the buying and selling and all of that. And then eventually he goes over to Israel and we've got Armageddon. And then you have the second coming and he gets chained. He isn't getting chained right after war in heaven. He still has years of time left. They tell us, woe to the earth. The devil has come down to you with great wrath because he has just a little time left. But it's several years. He's got a number of years to do his final piece of work. So they don't want you seeing that this is war in heaven. If you see that this is war in heaven, they can't move the whole thing into the final 7 years. It's not allowed. It's not allowed. They want this to be the second coming. And they want you to see that that's the end. But it's not if it's war in heaven, because Satan doesn't get chained. He just becomes earthbound and is turned loose for the final, let's say, 7 years. That's what's at stake here. They don't want you to know that. You think John MacArthur, I read you out of his MacArthur study Bible what he says about that. Oh, it's just astronomical events accompanying the Lord's arrival. Oh, come on. But he knows if I call it war in heaven, I can't move the whole thing into the final 7 years. So if you want to move this whole thing into the final 7 years, you've got a real dilemma. Now, I'm going to explain to you in just a couple of moments what you have to do if you really want to move this into the final 7 years, the things you've got to do. If you want to do them, go right ahead. Take the blue pill. Be happy. Be easy. Be comfortable until he comes upon you as a thief. We've got our problems too, but the problems and the sticking points for my side happen at the front end. Now, if the back end can't be moved into the final 7 years, the front end that's going to lead to these events that you see right here, Those events can't be moved into the final 7 years either because they're attached to these events. It's a step progression that leads to these events. And these events, these back-end events, prohibit us from putting it into the final 7 years because war in heaven will not allow it. So let's take a look at the top-end events that lead to this. We're going to do it in two ways. We're going to look at two versions. Luke, because Luke tells us something the other two versions don't tell us. Matthew and Mark are so much alike in this regard that we're just going to use Matthew, okay? So we're going to go to the early events in the Olivet Discourse and move our way to the back-end events. And you'll see the sticking point, the challenge that we have to acknowledge. We're going to go back to the point where he's still talking about the destruction of the temple, and he's telling them, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies and its desolation is near, to run, to get out of Judea. Here's what he says in Luke. Alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth, and wrath against this people. And then he goes on to say, they will fall by the edge of the sword, speaking of the Jews in Jerusalem and Israel. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So this is the first we've heard about the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles is now in play at the destruction of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be trampled down by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It will come to an end. Now, I've mentioned before that Jerusalem of Jesus' day is Old City in current Israel, and it's 90% Arab. Here's a tour guide book over there that talks about this. Old City, Jerusalem of Jesus' day is 90% Arab. It's still being trampled down by Gentiles. The prophecy continues. It's not a coincidence. It's amazing. But the times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. I've always said because many translators have said fulfilled means a number. Some people said, well, other theologians are saying it may not be a number. It may be abundance of something else. It may be a different criteria. Fine. I looked at the Greek word. I still think it's number, but okay. I don't know what the number is. Nobody does, so it doesn't do us any good. It's whatever the criteria is. At some point, the times of the Gentiles will have reached that criteria-filling moment. The Revelation 12 sign tells us we are near because it's pointing to war in heaven, and the church mission ends at war in heaven. It is there that we learn for the first time the church moves from overcoming, present tense, to overcame, past tense. Satan is thrown out of heaven, the church is received, and then the final years play out on earth. So he's establishing the times of the Gentiles. Note this, if we stick it on the list, that's a 2,000-year step right there. That event right there is a 2,000-year-long event. He doesn't say it like it's 2,000 years, but it is. It began at the destruction of Jerusalem, or it was fully in play at the destruction of Jerusalem, and it remains in play today. We are waiting for the fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles. But the other thing that I want you to take note of is great distress on the earth at this same time, at the destruction of Israel, and wrath upon the Jews. What is this great distress on the earth? Well, Matthew and Mark will make it clear. We're going to use Matthew, and he's going to make it very clear for us. We're going back to that same moment in Matthew where people are aware that Jerusalem is about to fall and they're running out of Judea. Christian historians tell us that's exactly what happened. They left. The Christians got out. They went to Pella, a few miles from Thessalonica in Greece, and saved themselves. Here's what Matthew has to say about that. And alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then, Greek word then, at that time, for then there will be great tribulation. such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And then a few verses later, Matthew says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Jesus said, at the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, there will be great tribulation at that time. And again, we see it will last for 2,000 years until there is war in heaven. War in heaven ends the tribulation. But wait a second. You're saying that the Great Tribulation has been going on for 2,000 years. That's what he's saying. That's what he is saying. This is why the church wants to pick the whole thing up and move it, wrong way again, and move it into the final 7 years. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying at the time of the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, then there will be great tribulation, unlike anything anybody has seen. And it lasts for 2,000 years. We see now that it's timed with Luke's account, the times of the Gentiles. The tribulation and times of the Gentiles are linked together and have been going on for 2,000 years. When Luke talked about great distress on the earth, this is what he was talking about. Great tribulation that began 2,000 years ago and has not ended. This is our challenge. This is what a number of people are trying to figure out. So how is this, the last 2,000 years, the worst time ever? Now, we're going to talk about that. But before we talk about that, I want to show you a couple of proofs about this that you need to see. The second one being kind of a mic drop moment, okay? To my sister and friends, that means when it's like a big walk-off. You've made your point, you drop the mic and walk off, okay? The first one is at the sixth seal, where the sun has gone dark and the moon is not giving its light and the stars fall from heaven. War in heaven is happening. And then after that description, John looks into heaven and he sees a sea of people from every nation, tribe, tongue, you name it. They're all there. Right on cue. That's the church. The Lord has sent his angels out to gather the elect, and that's where they end up. That's where we end up, in the throne room in heaven. And then John is approached by one of the elders who says, who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? John says to him, sir, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They came out. The church has come out of the great tribulation. The tribulation that has been going on since Jerusalem was destroyed and will continue to happen until there is war in heaven. At the sixth seal, we see war in heaven. And then we see the gathered elect standing in heaven, and we are told they came out of the tribulation. That's where they came from. Let me show you something else. This is chapter 1, the book of Revelation, written in the late first century. In his greeting to his fellow brothers and sisters, listen to what John says. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos, and on and on. He is saying that they, not just him, all his brothers and sisters are in the tribulation. That definite article, the, is in the Greek. He didn't say we are in tribulation, which anybody could be in at any time. He says the tribulation. Why did he say that? Because he was at the Mount of Olives when Jesus told them, when you see Jerusalem destroyed, then there will be great tribulation. And that tribulation will continue until war in heaven. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, sun will not give its light, moon and all of that, and the stars fall from heaven. John was there. He recognizes they are in the tribulation. The tribulation coincides with the church age. So how do we deal with, but a time like no other time, and it will never happen again? How do we deal with that? Let's deal with that. But first, let me show you the dilemma the other side has first, and then I'll show you our challenge. If you say, I want that tribulation and everything else he's talking about in the final 7 years, that's where I've always heard it was, and I'm the wrong side again. That's where I've always heard it was, and that's where I want it to be. Okay, here's what you've got to do. First thing you've got to do is you have to claim that Jesus was not talking about the temple standing in front of him, right across from him, as he's looking at it from the Mount of Olives. They just walked out of it. He says it's coming down. The disciples said, tell us about that. You have to claim that he was not talking about that temple in the first century, but a temple yet to be built sometime in the future. Because you don't want that to be about the first century temple, because the tribulation starts at the destruction of that temple. If you say he's talking about the temple in the first century, then the tribulation began at that point. You don't want that? Then say it has to do with a different temple. Even though the disciples didn't care about this future temple, knew anything about it, they wanted to know how their beloved temple gets destroyed. You have to claim it's a future temple. Now, I'm not saying there couldn't be a third temple. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying baloney. He's talking about that temple they're all staring at. But you've got to claim otherwise. Second, you have to claim that the times of the Gentiles haven't begun, because they are in play at the destruction of that temple. You don't want that temple to be a first century temple. So you've got to believe that the times of the Gentiles hasn't even started. It'll start sometime in the future, but it hasn't even started now. Come on. Thirdly, you have to believe that stars falling to the earth and the powers of the heavens will be shaken is not war in heaven, because war in heaven will not allow you to move this entire discourse into the final 7 years. That's what you have to say you believe. I can't say that with a straight face. Every single point on that list is absolutely insane. Crazy insane. I say no. If you want to take it, fine, here's your blue pill. But that is way too high a mountain for me to climb. I couldn't get myself to believe that if I had eternity to believe it. It's ridiculous. So I say, no, that's not what he's doing at all. He is clearly saying, when that temple comes down, the times of the Gentiles are in play, and there will be tribulation. And that tribulation continues during the times of the Gentiles until there is war in heaven. So how do we deal with it? We've got to respond to, well, he said it'd be the time unlike any other time or ever will be again. And if he hadn't intervened, there would be no human beings left. But for the sake of the elect, he will intervene. How do we say that as we look back over the last 2,000 years? Well, number one, okay, in my book, he said it. Number one. So I believe it. The fact that I don't maybe 100% fully understand it, he said it, I believe it. This to me is like one of the hard sayings of Christ. The quintessential hard saying of Christ is, if you don't drink my blood and eat my flesh, don't come after me. Okay, and then everybody left. Well, the disciples didn't. And they would then go on to learn what he meant by that. So we have to take it at face value too. He said it, it's true. Now, we can discuss, well, what could he possibly mean by that? But I'm accepting it, number one, because he said it. And I could sit here and do a whole rundown of all the wars, famines, and pestilence of the last 2,000 years and show you what an unbelievable meat grinder it has been. Unbelievable. Do a search on your own. Total number of deaths in war over the last 2,000 years. You're going to be amazed. It's stunning. It's nonstop. It will be page after 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 page. And that's not even the pestilences and the famines. Add those into it. And when you get to finally, you get the complete list of the wars. Those wars will be 25,000 people or more who died. Then there's this giant list afterwards, like an appendix, of minor wars that also took place but didn't kill more than 25,000 people. It's unbelievable what has taken place here on earth over the last 2,000 years. But I don't know that that's what he's talking about, not really. The details are gruesome over the last 2,000 years, but I think it's the principle of what's happened over the last 2,000 years. Satan has brought this pain. That's what we see with the four horsemen. The church goes forth, right along with him, the powers of hell, the red horse, black horse, and pale horse, all doing their horrible work. Because Satan has an infrastructure right now that is beyond belief. Paul says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." That is Satan's infrastructure that he has in place right now. That is all coming down. When he is cast down to earth with his angels, that infrastructure goes away. He is bringing the pain, but he will never, ever, no evil force will ever bring the kind of pain and authority and reach that he has now, that he is prosecuting on the church. That will never happen again. The pain that is coming in the final 7 years is God. He is bringing the judgments and the plagues. Someone said, yeah, but 50-pound hailstone at the end there in the final 7 years, that's got to be worse than what we're going through. God's bringing that. That comes from God. Satan is bringing this. It will never happen again. He will never be in that position. Even in the 1,000-year millennial reign, when he's released for a little while, it will still be an earthbound release. He has full reign right now. He has full communications up and running. That's why he could offer the kingdoms to the Lord early on. They're his. That will not be the case when he's thrown to earth. He will have limited reach, limited authority. God will bring the pain. What we're experiencing now will never happen to God's people ever again. Not now, not in the millennial kingdom, or ever again. That's something you have to consider that Jesus is talking about here. That's the difference between now and the next phase. What about, well, no human beings would be left if they did? That is the goal. I mean, it's openly discussed that at some point in this century, they expect us to be a post-human society. Through genetic engineering and splicing and transhumanism and all of that's where they're leading to. That is really why AI is being developed. When you listen to the leaders of AI development, this is something they want AI to help them with. That is what we're moving to, so that we will no longer be the image bearers of the Creator, essentially killing all human beings, turning them into another being, another species. That is openly talked about. Just Google post-humanism, post-human period that's coming. The Atlantic talked about it. The liberal, godless Atlantic magazine. And isn't it interesting? They start off by saying human history has been marked by wars and famines and pestilences, but we believe a new age is coming, a post-human age is coming. So that's what I think is probably at play here. The other thing that I would ask you to consider is the day after the sixth seal, when the Lord shows up and sends his angels out, what the world will look like the day after will not look like what it looks like right now. It won't be where people are going, well, that was really odd, wasn't it? Jesus showed up, angels went everywhere, took a bunch of people, and, oh well, no. It says every mountain and island is moved out of its place. If that's literal, that means look at the destruction. If every mountain and island is moved out of its place, what chance does man-made objects have? Overpasses, buildings, homes, roads, all that, you name it. If mountains and islands are moved out, what's going to be still standing the day after the sixth seal? If it's not literal and it's figurative, it's talking about all authority, all sovereignty is going to be moved out of its place on that day. Either way, the world is going to look remarkably different. and it may look very archaic. It may get knocked back into a pre-technological age. I don't know. He hasn't showed as much, but I'm saying something is going to happen. If Jerusalem is 90% Arab right now and won't be when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, and it comes in on that day, something's happening. And so that period of time will not even resemble this. Will not even resemble this. It looks like a very supernatural time, but it's not going to look like what we've been going through. What we're going through is very unique, and that's our challenge. And I guarantee you, there are millions of people who could do a better job than I just did on explaining that, if they believe it. I believe it. He said it. I believe it. It's just a matter of putting some thought into it and seeing it from his perspective. What he is saying is true, because the alternative is this. Deny that he's talking about the first century temple. Deny that the times of the Gentiles have begun. Deny that the powers of the heavens will be shaken is war in heaven. Deny all of that, and then you can pick up the Olivet Discourse, stick it into the final 7 years, and you'll have your tribulation in the final 7 years. But look what you've got to do to make that possible. No, I'll take our challenge over them. But listen, it's your decision. I've tried to give a fair appraisal of both sides. If you want what the church is teaching, take the blue pill. It'll make you forget all about this. And you can call me an idiot and a false teacher and whatever else you want. But if you want to come awake and find out and discover that what we've been taught has been horrendous and the time is near, the Revelation 12 sign is dramatically pointing to war in heaven. And all of these events are in play. And so are the ones that precede them, because Jesus said it.